Imagine strolling down an art exhibit where there is a simple abstract painting on your left and a mosaic art to your right. Where would you turn your attention first? As for me, I'd turn right. Why would I? Because I find mosaic arts more pleasing, more finesse, and more meaningful considering the different art media that have been used by the artist. In arts, mosaic is a decorative art of creating pictures and patterns on a surface by setting small colored pieces of glass, marble, or other materials in a bed of cement, plaster, or adhesive. This art is also observed in ecology. Our planet is a patchwork of forest, fields, golf course, hedgerows, pine plantation, pond, human habitations, and many more. This patchwork of different types of land cover is also called a mosaic. In this documentary, different factors of the landscape dynamics will be discussed in a nutshell. So sit back, relax, and be educated as we bring you to the Artist's Corner of Ecology. An example of this human-induced activity is the fire that devoured almost 50 hectares of Mount Banahaw in Quezon Province. Mount Banahaw, as we all know, is rich with natural resources.
Isa sa mga lugar na pinag-aralan ang Mount Banahaw sa Quezon. Namangha ang mga foreign scientists sa napakaraming uri ng halaman, hayop at insekto dito. Mahigit 100 taon na nang huling magkaroon ng malawakang pag-aaral sa kagubatan ng Mount Banahaw.
Yung mga dating kinolekta noong 1907, nakikita namin muli, which indicates na posibleng maganda pa rin ang kagubatan ng Banahaw. Ngunit meron din tayo mga alam na dapat nandito ay hindi pa namin nakikita uli. Posibleng wala na nga sila.
Dose-dose ng bagong species ng insekto at halaman ang natuklasan sa Banahaw. May bagong species ng gagamba at sikada na siya palang gumagawa ng ingay sa kabundukan.
However, due to the lack of discipline of some people, we tend to lose what we have because of our irresponsibility, where these natural resources tend to be at risk and suffer.
Animoy may bumabagsak na lava mula sa Mount Banahaw pasado alas 6 kagabi. Yun pala'y nilalamon na ng apoy ang paligid ng crater ng bundok. Magdamag na nagbaga ang apoy. Pagdating ng umaga, kita pa rin ang puting usok na tila isang malaking punit sa bundok. Agad tiningnan ng DENR ang anggulong tao ang may kagagawa ng sunog at pinaghinalaan ang isang grupong umakyat sa bundok nung linggo.
The fire that was presented is a large-scale disturbance that caused an adverse effect. In some cases, fire could be beneficial, but in this case, it was really devastating, wherein this human-induced disturbance fragmented the landscape of the mountain. To further discuss landscape dynamics, we have to define what landscape is. A landscape is a spatially heterogeneous area composed of patches embedded within a matrix. Patches are areas that are more or less homogeneous compared to their surroundings. These patches vary in size and shape, and are embedded within the matrix, from which they are often separated by distinct boundaries. Another feature of a landscape that can increase connectivity is the presence of corridors, which are routes that facilitate movement between patches. The proximity of patches to each other influences landscape connectivity, which is the ability for interactions to occur among patches.
Imagine a world without limits. Imagine how is it like to be in a place where there are no boundaries, no divisions, and everything just gets mixed up. Chaotic, right? Boundaries are described to be any area of contact, separation, or transition between patches. It is the point where the edge of one patch meets the edge of another. The presence of these boundaries indicate an abrupt change in the physical conditions between communities. Conditions like topography, substrate, soil type, or microclimate. These changes can cause associated changes in the structure of the community. However, boundaries are stable and permanent features of a landscape. Meanwhile, ecotones are transition zones of vegetation between two different plant communities such as forest and grassland. This varies in length. It may be straight or convoluted or perforated. The boundaries are connected through the fluxes and flow of materials, energy, and organisms. Environmental conditions between patches can enable plant and animal species to colonize boundary environments. There is this phenomenon that we call the edge effect, by which boundaries are often populated by a rich diversity of life. To put it in an easier way, the greater contrast or difference between adjoining patches, the greater the diversity of species. Although having a greater diversity of species seems to be an advantage, it can also attract predators in narrow and abrupt boundaries. Patch size creates a big impact on the structure of the community, species diversity, and the presence and absence of species. Altering its size and shape can affect the abundance and its parameters and interior environments. There are interior species that require environmental conditions characteristic of interior habitats and stay away from changes brought by boundary environments. The minimum size of the habitat needed to maintain interior species differs between plants and animals. The relationship of patch size to species diversity focus strongly on forests, and same concept also applies in other landscapes, grasslands, and marshes. However, there are areas fragmented by cropland, grazing, and housing developments. Landscape connectivity is the degree to which landscape facilitates or impedes the movement of organisms among patches. There are two components of landscape connectivity. Structural connectivity relates to the physical arrangement of habitat patches on the landscape. That is the degree to which patches are contiguous or physically linked to one another. Functional connectivity describes the degree to which landscape facilitates the movement of organisms and is a function of both the physical structure of the landscape as well as the behavioral response of organisms to structure. Distinguishing between these two types of connectivity is important because structural connectivity does not necessarily represent functional connectivity. Depending on its mode and limits to dispersal, the physical structure of a given landscape may facilitate the movement of one species while presenting a barrier to effective dispersal for another. Conversely, patches do not necessarily need to be structurally connected to be functional. One structural feature of the landscape that can facilitate organisms' movement between patches of suitable habitat is a corridor. Corridors are strips of vegetation similar to the patches they connect but different from surrounding matrix which they are set. Corridors function best as travel lanes for individuals moving within the bounds of their home range. But when corridors interconnect to form networks, they offer dispersal routes for species traveling between habitat patches. Corridors can have negative effects other than presenting barriers to dispersal. They can create avenues for the spread of disease between patches and provide pathway for invasion or spread of exotic species through the matrix to other patches. If too narrow, corridors can inhibit movement of social groups. Colonization involves the movement of individuals from occupied patches to unoccupied patches to form new local populations. This dispersal of individuals between local population is the key feature of meta-population dynamics. If no individuals move between habitat patches, the local population act independently. If the movement between individuals is sufficiently high, then the local populations function as a single large population. At intermediate levels of dispersal, however, a dynamic emerges in which the processes of local extinction and colonization achieve some balance where the meta-population exists as a shifting mosaic of occupied and unoccupied habitat patches.
Meta-community is the set of local communities occurring in discrete patches linked by dispersal. The basic focus in meta-community theory is to examine what regulates the coexistence of multiple species in that same system of connected habitat patches. The spatial configuration and species composition of patches influence dispersal and processes of colonization among the local communities. In turn, the species composition of patches determines the nature of species interactions, which influences the potential for new species to colonize a patch, as well as the ability of current species to persist. The average composition of the landscape may remain fairly constant in a steady state. This stat remains fairly constant when viewed collectively rather than individually, is similar to the concept of a stable age distribution. The proportion of individuals in each age class remains constant even though individuals are continuously entering and leaving the population through births and deaths. However, the overall mosaic is continuously changing. Some mosaic of patches that are observable today are not as they are before. Others are now a forest, but long before they were just grasslands. And some are filled with trees before, but are now used for industrialization as seen in the next clip.
Pinutol na ang 60 puno sa Luneta Hill dahilan sa itatayong 7-story Sky Park ng isang mall sa Baguio City. Ito'y kahit nasa bansa si Pope Francis na isang environmental advocate. Nagpapatrol si Diane Rivera.
Hitik sa puno ang Luneta Hill na kinatatayuan ng SM City Baguio. Pero noong Sabado, marami ang nagulat nang makitang wala na ang mga puno na karamihay mga pine tree. Ayon sa mga nakakita, pinutol ito noong Biyernes ng gabi.
As time passes, the landscape will continue to change. Patterns of land use will shift boundaries, succession will alter the structure of communities, and natural disturbances such as fire and storms will form new dynamic patches within the mosaic. Just like in your stroll along the art exhibit, after paying your attention to the mosaic, you will then observe the abstract painting to your other side and find out that the painter was the same, only that he was able to create the mosaic after many trainings and enhancements.